Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Perspective with Viv podcast. My name is Viv, and welcome to the show. Today's title is How to Heal a Nation and Why It Starts with You, featuring Phyllis Leavitt. Phyllis Leavitt is a retired psychotherapist with over 30 years of experience treating individuals, couples, and families, specializing in trauma, abuse, and dysfunctional family dynamics. A graduate of Antioch University, she co-directed a sexual abuse treatment program before entering private practice full-time. Phyllis is the author of A Light in the Darkness, Into the Fire, and her latest book, America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. Drawing from her own spiritual journey and clinical expertise, she explores how personal healing principles can be applied to national recovery.
Oh.
Okay. Now based in Taos, New Mexico, she writes and speaks on the urgent need to address America's psychological wounds with the same care we give to individual healing. Please give it up for Phyllis Leavitt. Hi, Phyllis.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here with you today.
It's my pleasure. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Great.
Let's start. So, Phyllis, you've written about both personal and national healing. What clicked for you to realize that America itself needs therapy?
Especially from having done so much work on my own childhood trauma and then becoming a therapist and working with so many people who really have suffered in their childhood, on a continuum from maybe some emotional abuse or neglect to overt violence in their home, whether it was name calling or physical violence or sexual violence or discrimination even within their own home, like one child being treated very differently than another child, or watching a parent be misused by another parent, that I am just so in touch with how much that kind of suffering leaves a person and how it really conditions the way we grow up if we don't have a chance to heal or even have a perspective that some of these things are not right or not good for us. We just find the best way to survive. We develop coping mechanisms that sometimes are not really very functional in adult life, like withdrawal or shutting down or failure to thrive or becoming highly aggressive as a way to feel like you could protect yourself or becoming a people pleaser or an addict or a workaholic or obsessed or overly rigid and righteous. There's so many different ways that people just really are trying to survive the things that hurt them. And it occurred to me because, so much of that is family work. What happened in your family? What did you learn about men and women? What did you learn was right and wrong? How did people deal with conflict? Did they try to settle conflict, peacefully and with respect for one another? Or did they shout each other down? Did they hit each other? Did they ostracize people? We were so impressionable growing up that those role models they get inside us and become part of who we are. And so many people, when they don't have a chance to heal or find safety, end up repeating what they learned. And they act those things out in their own families or in their workplace or in their schools or in their community. And we see this all over the nation, people, treating each other terribly. And we live in this kind of right, wrong, good, bad paradigm rather than understanding that when people are really highly dysfunctional, that generally they have some kind of unhealed wound that really needs attention. And so that's why people come to therapy, to heal what hurt them so they can live a more fulfilling and lovingly relational and safe life. And what if we brought those same principles to a country,
Hmm.
which we're in desperate need of today, I believe.
Wow, so profound. Thank you for sharing that. Was there a moment, political or personal, that made you say, enough is enough? We need to talk about this differently.
Yeah, I think, it actually really happened for me a long time ago. I had the idea for my book a long time ago. I didn't write it until more recently, but having been so steeped in family dynamics and having done so much work to heal my own childhood wounds, I think I was just highly sensitive to the pain that we inflict on one another and the high cost of discrimination and poverty and economic injustice and the injustice in our criminal justice system and war and the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and the gap between what we all want in our own lives. We all want to be safe. We all want to be loved. We all want to be valued. We all want to belong. We all want to feel like we matter and that can have a voice. And yet we deprive that for so many people. We take that away from so many other people. And that gap between what we want for ourselves and what we perpetrate in the world, whether it's here at home or around the world, for me became kind of overwhelming. And it was really like, enough is enough. We really need, as a nation, not just as individuals, but certainly as individuals, to get on a healing track and really try to give to one another what we so want for ourselves.
Thank you for that. When we speak about family, it's really interesting to see how the whole concept of everything begins from home and everything begins from inside and then spreads out into society. You spoke
Right,
about how people have abusive backgrounds, they have different mindsets that shape their, way of thinking, their perception. And as a result, we all go out into society and act those things out. And that's why
right.
there's dysfunction because if there's a dysfunction in a person, dysfunction is going to spread.
That's
And
right.
it's all about calling ourselves back to ourselves, coming back to ourselves and healing that. And then going out into society and spreading that healing.
That's right.
Yes.
And one of the things that I see, it was from going to therapy myself that I wanted to become a therapist
Mm.
because, experiencing, like, taking off some of the layers of pain and shame that I carried, made me want to help other people do the same thing. You just become so aware of the suffering in the world when you have a chance to safely begin to heal your own, that I think it just brings so much compassion, that people are really suffering in the world. And sometimes they act out terribly and we don't like the way they act out, but it's just so important. And I don't think it's the education that we give ourselves, on a widespread level, that the most hurting people are likely to become the most hurtful.
Hmm.
So, how can we stop that cycle rather than just blame people or throw them in jail or ostracize them or, hate them?
So true.
Because we don't do that in the best psychology. It's really, in the best psychotherapy, we try to really hold a healing stance, that we see the essence inside someone and we speak to that. And we really try to help people uncover that so they can become their loving, functional self in the world.
So what does collective mental health look like when a society, any society, is under deep emotional strain?
Well, I think we're seeing it. I think that our collective mental health has really deteriorated in America. I know that it's happening all over the world, where I think it's a combination. One of the things that I say is that there's many symptoms of abuse and neglect on whatever continuum people are experiencing that. And we mentioned some of them, like depression and anxiety and aggression and withdrawal and people pleasing and those kinds of things. But what I've identified in my work is that there are also two kind of main symptoms that come from untreated abuse and neglect. And one of them is called learned helplessness. When people are so overpowered repeatedly, sometimes they just give up and they don't fight back, or they've learned that fighting back will bring them more pain and more suffering or more violence. And so they actually become what we call helpless. They freeze in the face of violence or abuse or assault or neglect. And sometimes people can't even protect their own children because they're injured in themselves, that they really become paralyzed in the face of violence. And then the other side of learned helplessness is identification with the aggressor. And it's those people who have been hurt, who have decided on some unconscious level, usually, that they're never going to be hurt again and they're going to be the top dog. And they end up becoming violent and abusive often, or neglectful, or highly hateful, or whatever themselves. And so you have this group of people that becomes more and more controllable, and you have a group of people who become invested in becoming dominators. And I think that is actually flourishing in our society today, that we have more and more people who can be controlled and who become submissive through no fault of their own. They're just trying to survive. And people who have become highly aggressive and identify with the bully or the abuser on the playground. And so this is a very dangerous part of our collective mental health, because what you really want, and what we want in a healthy family or for ourselves in our own lives, is a relationship with other people where power is shared, where we see ourselves as equals, where we're willing to listen, where we're willing to compromise when there's disagreement, or at least sit down and try to hear each other and work it out for the sake not only of the individual, but of the collective. And I think we've lost that sense to a great degree here in America. Not that there aren't many people who want that and who enact that in their own lives, but it seems that in some of the positions of power, there's a tremendous identification with the aggressor going on.
Thank you for sharing that. So you draw parallels between family dysfunction and America's state of crisis. Can you break that down for listeners in terms of America as a country? But can you also break that down when applying it to other countries outside of America, like countries in the
Yeah,
global south?
right. Well, I think we're human beings, whether we're Americans or we're Europeans or we're in South America or Asia or Africa. We're human beings. And some of the dynamics that people live by and learn and are conditioned by in their families are really global. They're not just American. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of the things that we talk about when we look at a family system really apply all over the world. And there are some family systems in other countries that are much healthier than I think what's going on in America. There are countries that don't have armies, that aren't interested in building nuclear weapons or killing people or exploiting people across the ocean. But there are many people who are living in the kind of dynamics in their country that I just explained. And some of those dynamics look like this. So if you have someone who takes all the power or wants to have most of the power, or a group that wants that and wants to dominate other people, often what they want is to take from those people something that they want for themselves without recognition that they're actually either without recognizing or without caring that they're hurting the people that they're dominating and taking from, whether they're exploiting them economically, whether they're exploiting them sexually, whether they're, just discriminating them and looking down on them as inferior. These are some of the dynamics of an abusive family. I'll just say what some of those dynamics are in a family. And as I say them, I think you'll be able to see that they happen on larger and larger levels as well. So in an individual family system, if someone is abusive, they always justify what they're doing when they hurt people. I beat you up because you talked back, because you wore that short skirt, because you didn't get a good grade in school. So there's always a justification for their mistreatment of other people. Often you hear this when it's sexual violence, well, you asked for it, or you wore tight clothes, or whatever it is that people say. And they either believe it or they want other people to believe their justification. And then the people that they hurt become very symptomatic. They scream or they cry or they withdraw or they fail in school or they start bullying other children or they cut themselves or they start drinking or they hang out with, people who are also hurting and acting out. And then an abuser will blame their victims for their symptoms. So I hit you because you cried. Stop crying. I'll hit you more. Or you know what I'm saying? So like then their normal symptoms from being hurt are then cause for more abuse. So people who are discriminated against or they're withheld from in terms of the necessities of life, then they're labeled as lazy or entitled, and they're blamed for their inability to thrive in a family system that's not allowing them to thrive. Another characteristic in an abusive family is that those who try to call for help are often hurt worse, or they're silenced, or they're punished, or they're ostracized, or they're killed. That happens. And we see that in America today, sadly, where peaceful demonstrators are being tear gassed and shot with rubber bullets, or people who are trying to expose the truth are then maligned and called liars or fake news or whatever, whatever can be used against them. And these are all the dynamics of an abusive family system that are being now played out on larger levels. And one of the most insidious ones, and they're all insidious, but one of the most insidious ones is that an abuser will often get other people to align with them. And then so they get support for their abusive behaviors or their abusive attitudes. And they get other people, often by rewarding them for being complicit in what they're doing. I'm sorry to say that I think there's a lot of that going on in our country today. And I just want to throw this in, and then please jump back in. There's a lot of really amazing, good people in America today. There are probably just as many or more people who are generous, who are kind, who are inclusive, who are compassionate, who do good deeds for their neighbors, who help people who are in trouble. But they're not all over the news all the time. And a lot of what we get on the social media and the news channels is this kind of focus on blame and shame and attack and who won and who lost and who's right and who's wrong. And these become role models for our children of like how adults behave.
Thank you for that. So, how can psychotherapy and psychology help heal abuse and dysfunction from the bottom up and top down?
Yeah. And that's really the point of my book is can we use what we already know that helps break the cycle of abuse and neglect? Can we use what we already know to help people heal the wounds that they've already suffered so that they can be their greatest selves in the world and, function differently and form different kinds of relationships in their lives? And so some of the big principles of healing that we know work with individuals. And again, nothing is perfect. Psychology is not an exact science. Every human being is a little bit different than the next person, but there are patterns of what we see that do really work. And one of them is to really take apart our conditioning, to go back and actually look at what happened to us. What did we learn as children growing up about men and women, about conflict resolution, about values, about religion, about what's success and what's failure in the world? What did we learn? And what actually hurt us and what helped us? Because we want to build on the strength of what helped us and we want to take apart what hurt us. And what did we learn about ourselves that might have been negative? Like you're not lovable or you're stupid or you're worthless or you have no power or you're not wanted. When people are hurt, they take on some kind of negative belief about themselves that's not true, but it feels true. If you've gotten that message over and over again, either directly or indirectly, it becomes your truth. I'm just not a lovable person. I'll never amount to much. I don't matter. I'm not worthwhile. I'm stupid. I'm ugly. Um, and people we really internalize those messages. So part of therapy is taking that apart through different processes like EMDR or inner child work or hypnotherapy or psychodynamic work. There's, many different processes you can do in therapy that really help a person reconnect to the essential beautiful self that they always were, that they were born as. It's like peeling off the layers of hurt and the negative things we learned, just peeling that back and exposing our beautiful heart and our beautiful soul and our tendency toward love. And even science tells us now that we're all wired for love and belonging. And it's when we don't get love and safe belonging that we tend to become symptomatic. So the beginning is going back and really uncovering and peeling back the layers of harm and strengthening that inner core self that we all are, which is a beautiful, loving human being that we were born to be. There's no baby that was born a murderer or a rapist or an exploiter or a tyrant. There's no baby that was born that way. They become that way from the terrible things that they've either witnessed or that have happened to them. And then the other main principle, and I talk about a lot more than this in my book, but the other main principle is we have to learn how to listen to each other. We all want to be heard. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody thinks they're right and the other person is wrong. But the other person thinks they're right and we're wrong. So, how are we ever going to work things out, whether it's a couple in a home, or parent and child, or employer or employee, or government official and masses of people, or government officials opposing other government officials? How are we ever going to learn and create a loving family, a safe family of America, if we don't learn to listen to each other and honor each other and really try to work out our differences peacefully? And that really is the most important element, even when we don't agree, even when we just don't see things differently, even when we're angry or hurt or fearful, because that's what we try to teach our children in a healthy family, right? You can be angry, you can be upset, you can disagree with me, but we're not going to hit each other. We're not going to slam doors in each other's faces. And we're really going to try to listen to each other's point of view and find a solution. And that's probably the biggest gift that psychology has for America today, if we were willing to do it.
Thank you for that in-depth answer. There's so many layers to it, but I think that the heart of it is really about people returning back to themselves after uncovering the root of all of this. And as you said, childhood is really the defining moment for everybody. It shapes who we are as people. So that's the most vital thing, one of the most vital things you've said today, because that's how we form as a society.
That's
But
right.
how can people who are feeling spiritually disconnected start to rekindle parts of themselves, especially if they're in emotional pain or crisis?
How can people connect back to themselves? Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
There's a lot of ways, and they're not always easy, because sometimes we're really trained not to listen to ourselves, or not to trust ourselves, or to value ourselves. But one of the things I always say to people is, of course, it's really good to have someone who's safe and not judgmental to talk to, someone who sees you for your beauty and your strengths and your gifts. But not everybody has that. You know, I think that's what good therapy provides. If you have a good therapist, you have somebody who actually is rooting for you to be your best self, for you to heal, for you to flourish and grow and thrive in life. Not everybody has that. Sometimes we have it in friends, or we have it in partners, or we have it in neighbors, or we have it in our church. But when you don't have that, if there's somebody who really doesn't have a place to turn to another human being, there's a couple of things that I think are really helpful. And one of them is very simple and sometimes really overlooked, and that is, do what you love. If you love to paint, do it. If you love to write, do it. If you love animals, take care of animals. If you love to garden, grow things. If you love to walk in nature, do it. Wherever you connect to love and creativity is a place to start, and not to minimize the value of that, because so often people feel like if they don't feel valued by others, they feel like, what's the point of doing any of those other things?
So true.
But I know for myself, in my darkest time, nature was a place I turned. Painting was a place I turned. Writing poetry was a place I turned. And those things were so life giving. And sometimes it's like doing things for others. And I don't mean like, just sacrifice yourself and obliterate yourself, but sometimes it's really going out and doing something, an act of kindness for other people that can connect you back to your own humanity and your own sense of your own self-worth. Because too many people, I think, in our culture, we're so non-tribal anymore here, at least in many communities, not for all people. So many people are alone, and they really need that connection with other people to feel a desire to live. Reach out. Maybe there's a place to volunteer. Maybe there's just something that you'd like to offer as a gift to one person, or a community. But find your passion, because your passion is a connection to your life force, and your life force is a connection to your healing.
Thank you so much for that. People that have come on the podcast, one thing they've had in common is telling listeners that do what you love, and that's the beginning of everything. I love that you've reiterated that, because as people, we are looking for those things that light us up, but we don't know that it's about the things that light us up that sets us on our path. So yes, I do co-sign with Phyllis listeners when we talk about doing what lights you up, what you love, and then seeing what unfolds from there. You never know, honestly.
Right.
So what would you say to people who feel like healing a nation is too idealistic or too late?
Well, I think a lot of people feel that way. And I think that's part of the sadness of our time, that what's going on, a lot of what's going on feels like it's just way out of my reach to have any impact on at all. And, and I think that's an overwhelming feeling. And I think it's sad because I think it makes a lot of people feel like, what's the use? I'll just take care of myself. But what I would say is, a nation is made up of individuals. That's all it is. It's a group of individuals. And so to the extent that you or I or our neighbor or a friend or our children or a partner is willing to heal their own wounds, to connect to their own deepest self, to express their greatest love and creativity in the world, we actually do make a difference. And sometimes you'll never know. You might never know that your smile or your saying hello to somebody in the store changed their day. But I think that's really true. I know for me, when I go into a store, and I've said this a million times, when I go into a store, I love it when the checkout person is like, "Hi, how are you? How's your day?" Or I do that, and we just exchange a moment of caring about each other. And, it really makes a difference.
Yeah.
And for some people, their contribution is way bigger. They want to clean up the water supply. They want to make a program for foster children. They want to raise money to clean up the water or, help, programs for sex trafficking. Some people's scale of influence is very large. And sometimes our scale of influence seems minuscule and small. And what I would say is just don't underestimate the impact you can have. If you light up one person's life for a moment, you've done something.
Yeah. Those are great words. Now, any closing words you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, I would love for anybody to check out my book because I go into America in Therapy, because I go into great detail about what we're suffering from, I think, as a country and what the most healing principles are. So that would be just one thing. But basically, spread love, be love, and don't underestimate that you have value no matter who you are, no matter where you came from. And the other thing is, if you're really suffering, find someone to talk to, find someone who cares, find a program that can embrace you. Maybe it's a group for incest survivors. Maybe it's a group for dealing with addiction. Maybe it's a group for grief because you've lost somebody. But find other people because we need each other. We need each other more than ever.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to How to Heal a Nation and Why It Starts with You with Phyllis Leavitt. If this conversation stirred something in you, head to phyllisleavitt.com for her free guide, conflict type quiz, and her book, America in Therapy. And if you're ready to do the inner work that ripples outward, visit Perspective with Viv on all social media platforms, because the state of the world is not separate from the state of our hearts. Change begins within, and healing, personal or national, is always possible. Until next time, bye.
Thank you.